Hello and welcome everyone to the English events for applicants. My name is Richard Vardy and I'll be leading you through this evening's event. And I'm joined by four students who are going to introduce themselves.
Hello everyone, I am Jack. I study English literature.
Hello, I'm Lucy. I also do English literature.
Hi, I'm Natalia. I do English language and lit.
Hi, I'm Nathaniel. I also do English language and literature.
Okay, thank you. So I just thought I'd briefly go through the purposes and structure of today's event. One of the main focuses is to introduce you to the two courses that we offer, English literature, as we have two students on studying that, and English language and literature. I'm going to briefly go through the differences and similarities between the two courses. And then we're going to go on to model some of the approaches we take in a typical English lesson. So a mini lesson on literature and a mini lesson on language and literature. And obviously the students who are with me will be taking part in that. One of the main overriding purposes behind it is to ensure that you make an informed decision about whether or not English is right for you here at Reigate College. And also to ensure that if you do choose English, that you make an informed choice about English literature or English language and literature. So yeah, and there'll be opportunities at the end for a question and answer. So if you can use the question and answer function on Zoom to write questions at any point. And then at the end of the session, in the last 10-15 minutes, I'll go through and answer as many as I can. I'll also just introduce you. Well, I'll give an overview really of the department here at the college. It's a large department. There's about 500 students who study English in one way or another, and it's a very successful department. We arrange lots of trips. We're going to the theatre. We're going to the Globe this later this year to see Romeo and Juliet and A Winter's Tale. Sorry, Merry Wives of Windsor. Got that wrong. And we arranged talks from writers and journalists and publishers. We had visitors last week to speak to our lowest 6 students from the University of Portsmouth about studying English at university and provide lectures on some of the texts that we're studying. There's lots of work, lots of things that go on beyond the classroom as well. We run a reading group, a book club, and a creative writing club as well at lunchtimes running throughout the year. So it's a very vibrant department and very large and successful. Perhaps many of you came for the open evening. A very common question is what's the difference between the two courses, and you may have been given a handout that looks a bit like this. Very briefly, I just want to go through the content of the two courses, and in particular drawing attention to the differences between the two. So English literature is the study of English literature, perhaps unsurprisingly. We study plays, poetry and novels, including Shakespeare as well. English language and literature obviously has literature in it. And we study plays, translations, modern 20th century drama, Othello. We study The Great Gatsby, but an important difference is on the language and literature course, there's no poetry. Obviously, there's poetry in Othello, in the blank verse of Othello, but there's no poetry. In many ways, the equivalent for poetry on the language and literature course is the non-fiction. We study a range of non-fiction extracts and articles, both written and spoken, from a range of genres. We're going to look at an example of that later on in this session. The method of assessment is the same in the sense that there's 80% of the course is exam and 20% is assessed through coursework. It is entirely essay-based assessment on the literature course, and is mostly essay-based assessment on the language and literature course. But again, here we come to another key difference. The coursework on the language and literature is creative writing. So that's an important difference. So if you really like writing, a range of fiction and non-fiction, and also reflecting on your writing, reading as a writer and writing as a reader sort of idea, and allowing your reading to inform your writing and vice versa, then language and literature might be the one for you. And that the creative writing element is done entirely through the coursework. The skills which we cover, which we develop on the courses are similar in the sense that we work on effective communication, communicating your ideas clearly and accurately and in a structured way, also developing an argument and sustaining that argument through examples and interrogating and evaluating text. Analysis of text, analysis of language, analysis of literature. We situate text in context on both courses, and we also compare texts, looking at texts alongside each other to see what light they can shed on each other. An important difference on the language and literature course is we look at on the language and literature, we have a closer attention, a more forensic analysis of language, of what we might call linguistics, of how language works, looking at the grammar and the functions of language. Whereas on the literature course, we spend a little bit more time looking at alternative readings and looking at what critics have to say about texts, using those to inform ultimately our own judgments. So that is a brief overview of the differences between the two courses. I'm going to pass over now to the students who are going to talk about English from their perspective, the journeys that they've been on, because they were going through exactly the same processes that you're going through a couple of years ago. And so it'd be interesting to hear from their point of view. So we'll start with Jack.
Hello everyone, so I'm Jack. I went to Overton Grange School previously. I also study law A-level and business A-level. So I would say initially when deciding I wanted to do English generally, I just really enjoyed it at GCSE. And then sort of when decoding whether I wanted to do Lit Lang or Lit, I sort of looked at what the components of the courses are. And so poetry, I actually really enjoy poetry, nichely maybe, but I think that the course really allowed me to sort of deepen my understanding and knowledge on things that I'm really interested in. I think that's important to look at when you're deciding. And then also coursework wise, I personally don't really enjoy creative writing. And I think that I hopefully have done better on the other coursework. So allowing you to focus on maybe a specific thing, like I did doubles and doubling. So also that it really teaches you skills that are really valuable. So critical analysis or theoretical analysis, and then looking at language, but also context as a whole, and sort of appreciating that with the texts. And I think that really comes to light when you look at sort of Keats' poetry. Yes, it was written 200 years ago or so, but it really remains relevant now. And I think, so I want to study law at university when I finish college here. And I think that the skills that it has taught me and the lessons that I have learned along the way will really help sort of evaluate those texts. So when you're looking at law specifically for me, it is looking at those secondary texts and primary texts and how they compare like we do on the course, but also how they differentiate and look at how to sort of one understanding of another deepens your understanding of another. So yeah, thank you.
Hi, it's Lucy again. So I do, and I came from the Beacon School. So I do English Lit with history and psychology at Reigate, and I think those subjects work really well together, because with English, because I do Lit, we look at other readings, as was mentioned on the previous slide. So one such reading could be like a psychoanalytic reading. So like, I don't know if you guys know about Freud's like psychology perspective. So that's like gives me an interesting outlook on some of the texts we do. So Frankenstein, for example, is really interesting to look at through that lens. And then history, it's like a really similar skill set to English, so they complement each other really well. How I chose literature over lit and lang, and the main thing was that I wasn't really interested in the non-fiction side of the course. And again, I really liked poetry at GCSE as well, so I wanted to continue with the poetry and leave the non-fiction behind. So that's why like choosing lit was kind of quite obvious for me, but I know that it can be difficult for people to choose. My favorite part of the course is probably the novels. So I mentioned Frankenstein, we compare that with The Handmaid's Tale. And I just found it really interesting how two texts which seem so different actually have like a lot of things in common, like enough to be able to write many, many essays about it. So yeah, and then also I think the topics covered in those novels are just increasingly relevant to current events. So like women's rights in America, and also like the use of AI these days. I think you could link that to Frankenstein. And then after A levels, I'm hoping to study history at university. So the skills like we develop in English, so essay writing, but also looking at sources and different interpretations of text, that's all will help me with history at university.
Hi, I'm Natalia. I previously went to Woodcote and I do English Lit and Lang, Maths and Biology. And I found that doing English Lit and Lang, moving on from GCSE, to be a really good combination of both of them. So if you're quite indifferent to either language or lit, I would suggest going for both of them. I would also say that despite not having doing similar courses to the other students here, it hasn't really hindered my essay writing and my skill set base. I actually find myself further reading outside of the curriculum, which helps my essay and analysis. And also at university, they tend not to, even though they're both separate courses, I'm still going off to do English literature at university. So despite me doing the combined course, I can still apply for pure literature courses. So yeah.
Hi, Nathaniel. Previously, I went to Oasis Academy, Colston, and now I'm currently studying law and criminology along with English language and literature. I think the reason I chose language and literature was due to the fact that from obviously at school, you're doing language and literature already, and I've always just liked sort of combining both of the aspects together. So it's always just come sort of good for me. And then more looking into the subject, the courses, the actual text that we do, Othello and Great Gatsby, that appealed to me much more. And then from the coursework side of things, it's obviously I like it to do your own independent work along with essays, and creative writing as well from secondary. It's just sort of carried that skill. And then for the future, I've been looking into doing law apprenticeships, which is another thing that English comes in good for the fact that for me personally, for when I've applied for apprenticeships, I've had to sort of read a massive sort of law scenario script, explain it to the interviewer, and English has helped with sort of analysing and sort of explaining different aspects. Yeah, thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. That was very, very good. And yeah, I hope you all found that a useful insight into the decision-making processes of choosing English and choosing the A level, and also the range of options that English opens up for you after college as well. Different careers, different subjects, and of course a range of skills which can be applied to all of those areas. Right, so we are moving on to the sort of mini lesson bit. We'll start with the literature. So it's just a model in a very brief way, obviously on Zoom. So it's not exactly, it can't be exactly as it really is. But to model the sort of approaches that we take, starting with English literature and then language and literature. It is possible. So it's possible that you've had a chance to have a look at some of the the tasks which we sent round. So if you have those in front of you and your answers perhaps to some of the questions, then that will help you with some of the polls which are coming up. So that's some of the interactive element to the next half an hour or so. But equally, don't worry if you don't have that in front of you. It's not essential, but if you do have it, it might help you to answer some of these polls coming up. So we're going to look at a poem by John Keats. It was written in 1817, and it's called "On the Sea." And it is a poem which is on the literature course. We teach it in the second year. And along with other poems by John Keats, so we look at a range of poems by him. I'm just going to model how we go through this. First of all, we read the text. Now, reading the text can be set in advance. We might ask students to read the text for homework, whatever the text is, and or we will read it in class. I'm just going to read this poem out. And one of the first questions that we always ask is, what is your, to try and start with an open question. What's your impression? What sort of questions come your way? And what's your, how are you responding to the text as a reader? There's a definition, there's a glossary here on the slide and also on the handout which was sent around to you. Okay, so this is On the Sea by John Keats. It keeps eternal whisperings around desolate shores, and with its mighty swell gluts twice 10,000 caverns, till the spell of Hecate leaves them their old shadowy sound. Often 'tis in such gentle temper found, that scarcely will the very smallest shell be moved for days from where it sometime fell, when last the winds of heaven were unbound. O ye who have your eyeballs vexed and tired, feast them upon the wideness of the sea. O ye whose ears are dinned with uproar rude, or fed too much with cloying melody, sit ye near some old cavern's mouth and brood, until ye start as if a sea nymph's quired. So we are going to launch our first poll, which should be coming up shortly. And it's asking you the question, what does Keats particularly admire about the sea? So have a look at these statements and choose the one which you feel best describes your experience and understanding of the poem. I'll just give you 20 seconds or so to have a go at that. I'm seeing as an exciting bar chart, which I can see. There's one reading in particular, which seems to be jumping in the lead. These are, by the way, anonymous. I don't know who's there. I don't know what you're. Don't know who's saying what. Right, another 10 seconds on that. Okay, so we will end the poll there. And yes, hopefully you can all see now the poll results in front of you. And the winner is "He admires the sublime scale and force of the sea." So that's most of, not most, but that's got the 26 people chose that one. Others coming in, he admires the calm gentleness of the sea, and which is an interesting contrast with the preceding one. And lower down, we've got the sea provides solace and an escape from the pressures of life. So we're going to pass this now over to Lucy, who has studied this poem. And what we'll do, so things, this is a reflection of the sort of things that we we might do in a lesson, we'll ask students across the classroom for their views on what Keats admires about the sea. And as has clearly come through here in this poll, different readers have different views on it and prioritize or notice or enjoy different aspects of the poem. Okay, so Lucy, over to you for that. What do you think Keats particularly admires about the sea?
So again, there's no one correct reading of the poem. So I think what I have taken from the poem is kind of a mix of a few of the answers on the poll, but again, it's not just limited to those readings either. So I've said that Keats admires the restorative and rejuvenative properties of the sea, but also its ability to inspire the imagination. So for Keats particularly, a lot of his poetry was about writing poetry. So in the last line of the poem, he's kind of saying, use the sea as like your source of solace. Oh, gosh, that's hard to say. And then maybe it will inspire you to start. So it will inspire the reader's imagination, possibly inspire them to write poetry. But then also I know a lot of people chose the sublime answer. So I've said he views the ocean as an antidote to the struggles of everyday life, which links to the romantic ideal of the sublime. So finding comfort in nature.
Thank you, Lucy. So what we'd then do, if in a normal classroom, we'd ask other students for their views on that, to respond to that and to build on that. I might ask follow-up questions to Lucy as to why she's come up with those ideas. Another key aspect of English literature and on this language and literature course as well is for the vast majority of texts that we look at, we locate them in context. When we look at Keats, we consider his biography, for example. We've considered the influences of other writers at the time. And the poem is, as Lucy's touched on, it's clearly been influenced by and is situated in the Romantic movement, which is something we spend quite a bit of time considering, and for Frankenstein as well on the course. So I'm going to pass over to Jack now, who's going to provide a brief overview of the sort of things we cover and talk about when we think about Romanticism on the course.
So yeah, it's a very, very broad topic. We spend lots of lessons going over it. But yeah, a very brief summary is, so it was a late 18th, early 19th century movement, that really focused on the individual and their experience, their emotions, their feelings. And this is a very sort of central romantic piece. It's about nature, and they sort of use nature as an escape, but also as a source of solitude and sort of consideration in sort of an urbanized world, and their sort of natural opposition to that, because they sort of didn't like the way that it impacted lives, and the romantics sort of felt a duty to their fellow peers. And I think that yeah, this text really, especially at the ending, really sort of shows that.
Okay, thank you, Jack. This is a brief overview of Romanticism here, but Jack's is much better. And so we're now on to another poll, the second poll. And the question is, what is Keats instructing the reader to do at the end of the poem? A choice of 4 statements here. So far, only 2 statements are getting votes. One statement is pulling into the lead a little bit. Uh, 5 more seconds. Okay, we will finish there. Let's have a look. Okay, Sort of chef, yeah. And so we can see here the most popular vote was to be healed by the sea by sitting near a sea cave, and I've got the rest of it here, sitting near a sea cave and waiting for creative inspiration. So then we can ask a follow-up question. Jack's provided with an overview of what Romanticism is. So the next question can be, how has Romanticism, as you've defined it, influenced what Keats is trying to, what the instructions or advice that Keats is providing at the end of the poem? So over to you, Jack, for some.
So yeah, as sort of highlighted in the poll, it's sort of about sitting and healing by the sea and sort of that individual's experience and that isolation in amongst nature, and nature as a source of inspiration, especially poetic inspiration when considering Keats. And yeah, that urban life and the uproar rude that he talks about, and that sort of contrast to the nymphs quiet at the end, and sort of that ability to start the imagination and start the emotion. Yeah.
Thank you, Jack. So we can see, Romanticism has influenced Keats. We can combine that also with Lucy's point about sort of the nature as a source of the wellspring for inspiration. For him writing a poem at the end, it says, until you start, you kind of make a jump, an epiphany, a moment of creation, and using that creative imagination to picture sea nymphs singing around, well, he was in the Isle of Wight when he wrote this. Another thing we consider, I'm just going to very briefly go through this, but we consider the form of the poem. It's possible you may have considered or encountered sonnet or sonic form in your studies of GCSE. And this is what we might call a Petrarchan or Italian sonnet, which is one of the defining characteristics is the way in which it divides between the octave and the sestet, the first 8 lines, and followed by following a turn, which we call a volta, into the sestet. So the octave is clearly setting up and describing the sea, and then that's setting up the conclusion, really, that she draws in the sestet about what we should do when we do see the sea. Lots more to say about that, but that's just to give it gives you an indication of a sort of level of analysis of poetic form that we would consider. One of the tasks, which it's not a poll, but one of the tasks I did ask you to consider, and perhaps you did get round to it. So, are there any words, phrases, or images used to describe the sea that particularly stand out to you? So that's the point where we start to kind of focus in on the analysis and on the crafting of the poem as a work of art. So we big picture reading, big picture context, and then we start kind of focusing in on the poem, and especially with poetry, which clearly lends itself to that sort of that close analysis. So we'll start with Jack. Which words, phrases, or images stood out to you when you were reading this poem?
Yeah, so when looking closely, you sort of begin to notice patterns in poems, and I think that's a really good way of analysing poems. So you sort of notice the use of senses in it. So you've got the cloying melody, the uproar rude, the shadowy sound, the eyeballs vexed and tired, the feast, and sort of all this overwhelming sort of imagery of senses, and this ability to both contrast what the urban life is presented with senses, but then that with the imagery of the sea and that ability to cleanse and rejuvenate the soul. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Jack. So we're focusing on the sensory language and the sensory imagery, which is a marked feature of Keats's poetry, of course, the kind of synesthesia. Was like shadowy sound. Sound can't have a shadow, but in this poem it does, and how that helps to kind of develop a sort of tactile quality of the sea as he tries to evoke it in this poem. What about you, Lucy? Then, what were your sort of what stood out to you as a reader of this poem?
So I focused on the metaphor, the spell of Hecate. So that's a reference to the Greek goddess of witchcraft and the moon, and it's referencing the relationship between the moon and the pull of the tides in the cave. So obviously spell in Hecate has connotations of magic and mysticism, and it adds to this sense of the supernatural in the poem. So again, linking to the sublime and yeah, like common romantic ideals. But then also I think this is added to by the onomatopoeia and sibilance of the shadowy sound at the end of the poem. So yeah, I think looking at like mythological references is a really important way to analyze poetry, especially there's a lot of that in Keats's poetry, so that's useful for when you come and study.
Yeah, absolutely. And also an interesting link with the sea nymphs as well at the end, the kind of classical references. Here are some thoughts. Obviously, Lucy and Jack have covered some of these. We might look at some more examples here of a sensory imagery, the cloying melody, so the sounds being having a taste. And there's a sense of sort of excess with that. We can perhaps look at the repetition. We can think about who this sonnet is addressed to. Who is the you that he's addressing, and what's he telling us to do? It's not saying what he's going to do; it's telling us to do something. And that repetition emphasizes the urgency of his message. So on. There's plenty more, but just gives you just a flavour of the sort of methods and craft that we analyse on the literature course. As mentioned briefly, one of the distinguishing features of the literature course compared to the language literature course is we spend more time considering different views, different interpretations of the text. And I've just selected here just to emphasize really how, in Keats's case in particular, how his reputation changed and grew over the decades and centuries, especially following his early death. In his lifetime, he did have some positive reviews, but largely he was criticized. In one review, he was described as an ignorant, unsettled pretender. I'll take my glasses off for this. Uneducated, a flimsy stripling, without logic enough to analyze a single idea or imagination enough to form one original image. So the first readers, perhaps with some sort of class snobbery coming in here because they look down their nose a little bit at Keats's level of education, dismissed him as a pretender, someone who is not worthy of accolade. His reputation grew following his death. As the Victorian pre-Raphaelites, in particular, were interested in the sensuous richness and vivid pictorial effects of his poetry, as we saw demonstrated quite clearly in this poem. More recently, critics have admired the way Keats radically engaged with class politics and economics. So they may focus, rather than on the pictorial effects, they may focus perhaps more on the sestet, the ears dinned with uproar rude, and fed too much of cloying melody, the eyeballs vexed and tired, the politics and the weariness of work, and economics, and how that can draw us away from the things that really matter. Right. So moving on now to that's a brief glimpse, a brief taste of the literature course, and moving on now to the language and literature course. Again, equally on the same task sheet, there's an extract from an article by Charlie Brooker. We're going to, again, go through, it's a very similar process, obviously, perhaps unsurprisingly. We're going to focus on reading and understanding the text, considering the text in context again, but it's a different sort of contextualizing that we might do on this course. And then again, applying and looking, analyzing closely the language. But in this case, we're applying perhaps more rigorously some language frameworks of grammar and vocabulary. And I'll mention briefly as well the ways in which on the language and literature course we might be responding creatively to a text as well. So this Charlie Brooker text is from an anthology which we teach, which we study on the language and literature course, largely in the first year, although then we visit in the second year with revision. And this is an extract from a longer article which is in the Voices anthology, and it's taken from the Guardian newspaper, and it's written by Charlie Brooker, who's famous, especially for his creation of the Black Mirror TV series, which started out, I think, on Channel 4, but is now on Netflix. In this article, he's explaining why he has decided to stop writing a weekly opinion column. And in particular, in this extract, he's focusing on Brooker's on his views on the reader comments, which was this is written in 2013, relatively early stages of this process, in which people can obviously write their comments, write their views on the article that he's writing underneath. It's called below the line. So I'm just going to read this out. It's just, like I say, an extract from a longer article. Reader comments form part of the overall word storm. And it's true, I'm not a huge fan of them, but that's chiefly because I'm an elderly man from the age of steam who clings irrationally to the outmoded belief that articles and letters pages should be kept separate, just like church and state. I guess conceptually, I still think I'm writing in a newspaper, even though the reality of what that means has changed beyond measure since I started doing it. So now I'm sitting grumpily in a spaceship with my arms folded, wearing a stovepipe hat. Ridiculous. These days, most newspaper sites are geared towards encouraging interaction with a minuscule fraction of readers who bother to interact back, which is a pity because I'm selfishly uninterested in conducting any kind of meaningful dialogue with humankind in general. I'd say Twitter's better for back and forth discussion anyway, if you could be asked with it. Yelling out of the window at passers-by is another option. Shows its age a bit, obviously with Twitter, it's now called X. So we are going to now focus on another poll, which is what do you think Brooker's views are on reader comments? So another poll here. This is the third of 5 polls we'll be doing. A choice of 6. And this is just what you think. Obviously, there's more than one correct answer. Which one speaks to you the most? Quite an even spread across three readings. Okay, I think we'll finish there. And here are the results. The third one is the most popular choice with 23 votes. He has old-fashioned views and thinks if people wish to make a comment, they should write a letter to the newspaper instead. So that old-fashioned sort of quality of that Brooker might be identifying with. So we're going to hear now from, there's obviously different readings, different emphases, as there is with any text. But we're going to hear from Nathaniel, see what he thinks Charlie Brooker's views are in this text.
Yeah, so obviously sort of throughout the text, you can tell Brooker is very opinionated and judgmental about his views specifically. And then through that tone, he creates that response to the readers of sort of the lack of care and being so patronizing, which is shown through his sort of, it's also confrontational through just directly addressing the comments, showing the lack of care through that, which he does repeatedly throughout the text, and especially in this extract here.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you. So, so we start with that sort of bigger picture. We read a text, we form an understanding of the meaning. Sometimes the meanings are explicit, sometimes they're implicit. Sometimes we have to see how a text is trying to convey its attitudes and its values to the readers. And then we contextualize the text. We'll look at a range of things. We will consider for obviously some of the text in the language literature course, like Othello and The Great Gatsby, we'll contextualize in the same way that we saw demonstrated with Romanticism and Keats. But some of the non-fiction texts, we also have other sort of context or emphasize context in different ways. We might consider the ways in which the text is influenced by genre conventions, this being an opinion article, by the audience, by who the writer and the producers of the text have in mind when they're constructing the text, and what the purposes are, what the writer's trying to achieve, or the speaker in some of the texts are trying to achieve through, and that could be more than one. So the next poll is for you to consider: what types of audience do you think this article is aimed at? So it should be coming up. And this is multiple choice, so you can choose more than one for this one. Okay, another 10 seconds. Okay, I think we'll finish there. And okay, so we can see quite a spread here. The most common one, readers of the Guardian app. It did first appear in the Guardian newspaper and the Guardian app. Interesting, we've got here sort of left-wing university educated, right-wing university educated. We'll focus quite a bit on that. Who are the readers of the Guardian? What sort of people typically read that, and how might that have influenced some of the ideas in the text? So we don't just look at this in isolation. We look at how it's kind of find its way through into the language and structures of the text itself. And we're on to now our final poll. So this is where we closely analyze the text. In this one, we're going to start by thinking about the tone of the text. What tone of voice best describes Charlie, this extract here from Charlie Brooker. And again, choice, there's only a single choice for this one. What for you best describes the tone of voice of Charlie Brooker? Okay, we'll finish there. Thank you. So we've got again, I think this speaks really of the kind of the kind of varying or the different tones. We can perhaps use the plural here, couldn't we? We've got humor, but also bitterness. We've got informal and serious of all sort of being identified here. So I'm going to pass over now to hear what Natalia has to say about your reading of the tone of the text.
So I mostly agree with the people who said bitter and humorous, because I see the tone as very inflammatory and self-deprecating. And within the context of him as a TV presenter and the creator of Black Mirror, which we all know is highly critical of society and technological, oh my God, technological advancements, that really shows that his main purpose of the text isn't necessarily to draw people away from the act of newspaper and writing traditional letters. It's more for degrading what journalism has become, as it's become oversaturated. It doesn't really have any more substance anymore, which is why I feel like he uses that Twitter reference in there to just say that something that he was really passionate about, his work, has just kind of diminished into something that doesn't hold substance anymore. So yeah.
Yeah, he calls it the word storm. Yeah, because sometimes we have too many words, too many views, and we lose a sort of center of gravity with that. Yeah, so he's left sort of sitting grumpily with his arms folded because the world is changing all around him, all around us, not just him, obviously, with the sort of technology. And a response, it's worth knowing, is 2013. This is when we're kind of used to it a little bit more now. But 10 years ago, these things were kind of relatively new innovations about the ways in which readers can interact with the text or with the article. And it's a sense of someone coming to terms with that, or struggling to come to terms with that. And then we can zoom down. It's a slightly bigger, it still counts as a method, I suppose, by identifying tone. But then we are on the language and literature course, we spend a lot of time developing students' skills of this kind of close analysis, of being aware of these, what we call these language frameworks, these different categories of language functions. So looking at the grammar of the text, looking at patterns in the text, looking at the vocabulary of the text. And considering how they've been influenced by context and how they are helping the writer to present their ideas. So again, just passing over now to Nathaniel, who is just picking up on a couple of, obviously not the whole text, but a couple of aspects of this article, both the extract here and the wider article, that stood out to him.
Yeah, so in order to sort of create a more personal readership with the reader, he uses a lot of direct address, so like saying you're and you, to sort of really connect with the reader to get his point across. And then through doing that, especially in this extract, he uses a lot of hyperbole, which is over-exaggeration. Through that over-exaggeration, it's sort of he's using these devices to create his humor and his point that she further sort of gets across to the reader. He does this with multiple other ones, such he's got extended metaphors, which runs through the whole text, and through here to sort of just further create his relationship with the reader and get his point across.
Thank you, Nathaniel. And Natalia, what stood out for you in the language of this text?
What stood out for me for the whole text was the semantic field of being left behind in society. And I think in that extract that's shown with him about his age, where I think he was only about 46 at the time of writing this extract, which is not too old. And that kind of with the other links in the text where he uses more semantic fields about pollution and more ecological syntax, it just kind of proves that kind of generation gap difference and what has changed in the society and in the newspaper world. And yeah.
Yeah, and 46 is not too old at all, you know. So just to demonstrate this, I'm just going to spend just a few seconds just going through this. I've selected a 3 sentences, consecutive sentences from this extract, just to demonstrate the sort of level of close analysis which we can do, which we could train students to develop and explore. I think the first 3 words capture that the strange blend, not strange, but the interesting blend of formal and informal. I guess, which is an informal colloquial expression, contrasted with a quite abstract and more formal adverb conceptually. So, so this is although there's humour here and there's informal colloquial expressions, it's actually touching on some quite complex, quite serious ideas about as we heard from Natalia, journalism. Therefore, it's perhaps unsurprising that there's a high degree of complex sentences, as we can see in that first sentence, with a mix of subordinating and subordinate clauses and main clauses. He develops the idea, so he fronts the conjunction. He starts the next sentence with fronted conjunction, so, to suggest obviously the development of that idea, and following that with the adverb of time, now. So this is what's been happening. This is what he's thinking about, and now, what situation is he finding himself in the midst of this technological change? And he feels like, yeah, he's kind of deliberately leaving himself behind, really. The adverb of manner, grumpily, really suggesting that sort of the stubbornness with which he's not embracing technology. We've got the humorous image as well, the stovepipe hat, those kind of Victorian sort of tall hats, sitting there in a spaceship wearing a stovepipe hat. The minor sentence ridiculous is a comment both perhaps on the situation, on technology, but also on him and his own sense of sort of ridicule. And that's obviously reinforced by the fact that it's a minor sentence. So we conduct kind of a close analysis. That's just a brief glimpse of the sort of thing that we do. Not so much, to be honest, with the Charlie Brooker article on the course, but for other texts that we look at, we will study them in this sort of way, and then we also think about how this text can influence us as a writer, and so both in terms of the ideas, but also in terms of the crafting and the style. So at certain points in the course, we might then use a text such as this to kind of springboard into some creative writing. For example, this might kind of generate ideas to write a chapter from a memoir describing your first encounters with social media as a teenager and what that was like. So that brings in the sort of creative writing aspect as well. So that is a brief we spent about sort of 10-15 minutes on each course, just giving you a glimpse into sort of approaches that we take, the sort of level of thinking and analysis that we do on these courses. A common question that we get asked is, what can I do to prepare for the courses? A good idea would be to read The Handmaid's Tale, especially if you know that you're going to be studying on the literature course, or The Great Gatsby, which is obviously studied on the language and literature course over the summer. Just get hold of a cheap copy and get stuck in. Just read it and read them and enjoy them. Or more broadly, the best English students are the students that read. The more you read, the better reader you become. Launching will be some new starter activities which will be available on the college's website, and keep your eye open for those, and they will kind of draw your attention towards some of the things you can be doing to prepare for the courses. Included on those activities is an extended sort of reading list of just not necessarily specific for text we're studying, but just books we think you will enjoy reading, to give you some sort of summer, some beach reads. And is at this point where we give you some time to write some questions. Perhaps some of you already have written them in the question and answer forum on Zoom, and I will endeavour to answer them and or pass them over to students. Okay, so is A-level English language and literature a big step up from GCSE? That's a great question. Is it, and it's specifically language and literature as well. Nathaniel, what was your experience like in terms of moving from the level of GCSE and the level at A-level, especially in those first few weeks?
Yeah. I think You think it'll be a lot worse than it is, because when I first started the jump, because you originally do voices when you first start, so you're going in, you're not just jumping straight into like just analyzing all these different A-level techniques. It's a slow, gradual move up from GCSE to there, which builds you up then to do that A-level. So you're not just thrown in the deep end, you're gradually built up to know what you're doing over time.
Good answer there, Nathaniel. Yeah, so we kind of build we build it up. We don't just throw you in at the deep end, although obviously there is a step up. Another question here, nice kind of mathematical one. How many hours of teaching per week, and how long do you spend typically and on average? I'm looking at the titles for homework or work outside of lessons. Yeah, how many hours do you spend? How many hours of English do you study a week? In class?
So in a week I do 4 hours of English, so that's two-hour lessons. And for homework it really quite varies, especially with English. Some weeks, we get weekly like prompt structured learning, which is like helps you prepare for your next lesson, which I have found like very valuable, even like especially now because we're going back over past content, so it's good to refresh that in my mind. But the homework for specifically my course, so English Lit and Lang, it's very manageable. I've never been ever overwhelmed with it, and it can be quite enjoyable too. So yeah.
Okay. The minimum expectation is we 4 hours of study in class, follow alongside 4 hours of study outside of lessons. So it's 2 hours of homework, 2 hours of structured learning that Natalia mentioned. Okay, this is an open question. You can have a kind of a short answer to this one, Jack. What's the coursework like for the lit course? So what's the task, I suppose?
So you write a 3,000-word essay on comparing your text on The Picture Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and so you can either do the yellow wallpaper, or you can do a collection of short stories by Edgar Allan Poe. So yeah, you can choose a theme that you want, so that's really nice to sort of delve into a specific topic you want, because on the course you cover tragedies, comedies, Gothic and all that, and I went for doubles and doubling, so think of Jekyll and Hyde, and I sort of really explored that. And yeah, it takes a long process. You're not just like jumped into it and write a 3,000-word essay. So yeah, it's nice. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's like a unit on the course. Really, we spend as much time preparing for coursework as we do on John Keats. Really. And a question here on: do we need specific edition of the books we're studying? You'll be issued books by the college, by the department, which is a bit like it is a library kind of issuing books. So you can't write on them, but you are given the books, all the books and materials that you need for the course. If you want to start reading over the summer, it doesn't really matter which edition you pick up, maybe a second-hand edition. But for what it's worth, if we're just mentioning the two texts that I mentioned, for The Handmaid's Tale, it's the only regularly available edition of that novel, which is published by Vintage, and for The Great Gatsby, it's the Penguin Modern Classics edition, if you want to get the page numbers the same. But really, it doesn't matter because you are given 4 books at the beginning of the course. Lent the books, of course. Okay, so another open one. This is for you, Jack. Most important skill learned on the English literature course. Which one do you think has been most important for you? Perhaps, again, you may mention this at the beginning, but for your sort of career in law.
I would sort of say critically evaluating things, because I'd say that's especially a skill that you cover a lot more at A-level than GCSE. Sort of understanding other opinions and alternative interpretations to develop your own, and sort of compare and contrast those.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Jack. For the exam, there's a question here: will you be given unseen text to analyse like GCSE? Yes, very much so. On the language and literature course, 2 unseen texts, and on the literature course, an unseen poem. So there is unseen elements. So that's developing again and building. One thing I didn't mention, perhaps should have done, is one of the good things about English A level is building on things that you've already studied, or the skills that you've already developed at GCSE. So you're already used to kind of or you will be used to responding to unseen texts. So we're building on that in A level. So a lot of what we cover is very familiar, but we're building on things you already know. What other questions we've got? What support is there for those who struggle a bit? We have within the department, obviously, there's the teachers and ourselves are supportive, and we're always there to help all students. We have plus classes as well, which is an extra, like a 5th hour. So we've got 4 hours that Natalia mentioned, and then we also have for sometimes all students a 5th hour where we really focus especially on essay and exams, essay writing skills and exam skills and so on. We also work closely and liaise closely with learning support, the SEN department, and we have lots of other support wide across the college, so many different levels of support depending on where the struggle is coming from. But we have mentors and academic mentors and learning facilitators and student mentors as well. There is a lot of support for all students. We also have Aspire as well for students, supporting them as they perhaps apply for more competitive universities and so on. Do we do a speech? You don't write a speech necessarily, but you will study some speeches. For example, JFK's inauguration address. That's not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Just a couple more quick questions. This is an interesting one. Are we encouraged to develop our own writing style or expected to follow a structure? You're expected. You are encouraged to develop your own writing style. Is the answer to that? However, we provide structures. You look upon it as almost like scaffolding. We provide some structures for writing essays, especially early on, and then the idea is because take those kind of that scaffolding away, and to allow you to kind of develop your own voice as a reader of text. But like I say, there is we spend a lot of time on how to write a good English A-level essay. There's a lot of support on that in class, outside of class, feedback from assessments and so on. The exam board for both courses is Edexcel. Pearson Edexcel, that's the same thing. Perhaps time for one more question before we finish. How many poems for lit? Do you know the answer to that, Jack? Oh, he does.
So you do 20 in your first year on poems of the decade, and then you do 14? 15 for Keats.
Brilliant. So. Okay. I think maybe one more might be coming my way. Your portion of own writing. Okay, but how much of it is creative and how much isn't creative? Basically, 20% is for the coursework, which is the creative side. 80%, which is the exam assessments, is analytical. It's basically essay writing. Right. Okay. So, quick fire questions there. We covered a lot actually. Good 10 questions. So thank you all for taking part in this session. I hope you found it useful as you make your decisions about which courses you want to do here at the college and which obviously English course you want to do. And hopefully it's inspired and motivated you to obviously to study English and perhaps you're especially looking forward to it now with all the experiences and journeys that we've heard from our students. We perhaps just wave goodbye. We won't unmute ourselves. We'll wave goodbye, and I look forward to seeing you before or after the summer for the various sort of welcoming events that we have. As we sign off, could you make sure that you complete? We would appreciate it if you could complete the survey, which will pop up as we finish. Okay, well, thank you very much, and I look forward to meeting you all shortly.